I remember the day it happened with a clarity that still stings, even years later. The smell of jet fuel, hydraulic fluid, and stale coffee hung heavy in Hangar 4, a familiar perfume of my life. It was a little past 11 in the morning, the sun already glaring through the high windows, turning the dust motes dancing in the air into glittering specks. I was elbow deep in the guts of an F-16's engine, my wrench a natural extension of my arm, the hum of diagnostic tools a comforting lullaby. My uniform was smudged with grease, a badge of honor I wore with quiet pride. I was Sergeant Isabella Rossi Izzy to my few friends, and I could coax a recalcitrant engine back to life faster than most of the guys in our squadron. Then Chief Master Sergeant Rask, Gunner as everyone called him, a man whose presence alone could curdle milk, bellowed my name. "Rossi! Front and center!" My gut clenched. Gunner was old school, Army to Air Force transfer, with a face like a roadmap of bad decisions and a voice that could strip paint. He didn't believe in niceties, especially not for women in maintenance. I wiped my hands on a rag, the grease refusing to completely relinquish its hold on my skin, and made my way through the labyrinth of aircraft parts and toolboxes. Heads turned, murmurs followed. I felt like a bug under a magnifying glass. He stood in the center of the hangar floor, a photograph held aloft in his beefy hand, a smirk twisting his face into an even uglier mask. The guys from my crew, the ones who usually had my back, shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between me and Gunner. Some even chuckled nervously, a sound that felt like a punch to my ribs. "All right, listen up, troops," Gunner's voice boomed, echoing off the high ceilings. "Our very own Sergeant Rossi here. She's got a hidden talent." He waved the photo for all to see. It was a picture of the elaborate cake I'd baked for the squadron's morale booster last week, a multi-tiered marvel decorated with our squadron's emblem and tiny edible F-16s. It had taken me hours, a labor of love for my second passion, one I usually kept carefully separate from my military life. "Look at this masterpiece," he sneered, holding it closer. "Wouldn't you say this belongs in some fancy bake-off, maybe on a TV show?" Air Force. People, we need grease monkeys, not Betty Crockers. He threw the photo onto the hangar floor, where it landed with a pathetic flutter, face up, my beautiful cake staring back at me, ridiculed. Laughter, louder this time, rippled through the hangar. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to make my ears burn, enough to make my stomach knot tighter than a poorly tied knot. My colleagues, my brothers and sisters in arms, the ones I'd shared early morning call times with, the ones I'd swapped deployment stories with, they turned away. Some pretended to be engrossed in their work, others just walked off, unable or unwilling to meet my gaze. The feeling of being utterly alone, abandoned in a room full of people, was a chill that seeped into my bones. I stood there for a long moment, watching the grease on my hands dry, feeling the weight of Gunner's triumphant smirk. I didn't say a word. There was nothing to say. I just bent down, picked up the crumpled photo, tucked it into my uniform pocket, and walked back to my F-16, the hum of the engine suddenly a mocking tune. Later that day, just as the sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples, my phone buzzed. It was my father. Retired Army Master Sergeant Rossi. Another voice, another layer of judgment. "Isabella," he said, his voice gravelly, without preamble. "Your mother told me about that cake you made. My heart sank. Here we go." "Dad, it was just for a squadron event, a morale thing." I tried to sound nonchalant, but my voice wavered slightly. "Morale? Isabella, you're wasting time with these useless baking hobbies. You're a NCO, a non-commissioned officer. Your focus should be on your career, on climbing the ranks, not on cakes. What kind of example are you setting? We didn't send you into the military to be a baker." The words were a mirror of Gunner's, only sharper, more personal. They sliced through me, finding the raw, open wound. It wasn't just the Air Force telling me where I belonged, it was my own family. My father, the man who taught me discipline and the importance of service, saw my passion as a distraction, a weakness. He'd always pushed me towards the tough path, the Army path, and my choice of the Air Force and my quiet love for baking felt like a constant disappointment to him. I mumbled something about having to go, the signal breaking up. He hung up without a goodbye. I stared at the setting sun, a familiar ache blooming in my chest. Was I a mechanic, hands stained with oil and purpose? Or was I a baker, with flour-dusted hands and a heart full of unspoken sweetness? Could I be both? Or was the military, and my own father, forcing me to choose? The silence of the barracks room pressed in, leaving me with a question that felt heavier than any wrench I'd ever lifted. Where did Isabella Rossi, the woman, truly fit in a world that only saw Sergeant Rossi, the grease monkey, or Betty Crocker? The humiliation clung to me like a second skin, heavier than my Kevlar vest, 1,000 times more constricting than my full combat gear. It wasn't the kind of shame that makes you want to crawl into a hole. It was the kind that burns, that makes your blood simmer with a furious inadequacy. Every stare, every hushed whisper, felt like a fresh cut. Ramstein, a place that had once felt like home, now felt like a cage where every bars were invisible but impossibly strong. I'd been running on fumes since just after dawn, the anger and self-loathing a bitter fuel. By late afternoon, with the sun already dipping low enough to cast long, distorted shadows across the barracks, I knew I needed to disappear. Not from duty, not from the Air Force, but from the relentless echo of gunners' sneering laughter in my head, from the judgment I read in every pair of eyes. The only place on this sprawling base where I could truly breathe, where the air didn't feel thick with judgment and the stink of diesel, was the community garden. It wasn't much, just a patch of green ambition carved out of Ramstein's concrete and tarmac, nestled between the motor pool and a rarely used storage facility. A quiet defiance. Most people thought it was a waste of perfectly good space, preferring their neatly manicured lawns or the sterile comfort of the rec room. But for me, the scent of damp earth and growing things, the gentle hum of bees, was a balm. It was where I went to shed the uniform, if only metaphorically, and remember I was more than just a uniform number. As I pushed open the creaky wooden gate, the sound a soft groan against the late afternoon quiet, I scanned the rows of nascent vegetables, the struggling fruit trees. It was here, amidst the burgeoning life, that I saw him. Hunched over a neglected patch of soil near the far fence line, his back to me. Leo, the ghost of Ramstein, they called him. I'd heard the whispers, seen the way people skirted around him in the chow hall, how his name was spoken in hushed, pitying tones. He was a new transfer, just arrived a few weeks prior from some god-forsaken deployment they only hinted at, a place where the sun baked everything to dust and the nights were full of screams. Fresh back from whatever hell he'd been through, suffering from PTSD so severe he rarely spoke. He was thin, almost gaunt, his shoulders slumped as if carrying an invisible weight. His uniform, though clean, seemed to hang on him. He moved with a sluggish, deliberate precision, like a wind-up toy running low on battery power, meticulously picking at a stubborn weed. Everyone avoided him. They didn't mean to be cruel, not really. It was just easier. His silence was a barrier, his wounded eyes a mirror reflecting unspoken horrors that made most people uncomfortable. He was a living reminder of the fragility beneath our tough exteriors, the cost of the oath we all took. He was the consequence nobody wanted to acknowledge, but as I watched him, a strange current sparked inside me. Not pity, not exactly. Something deeper. A flicker of recognition for that profound, bone-deep loneliness he exuded. I knew that feeling, that chilling isolation, the sense of being utterly adrift even in a crowd. It had been my constant companion for the past few hours, tightening its grip on my heart. He hadn't looked up, hadn't acknowledged my presence. Just kept at his task, head bowed, his dark hair falling across his forehead. For a long moment I considered walking over, just saying something, anything. Maybe offering a hand with the weeding. A silent nod of solidarity. What did I have to lose? I was already an outcast, already branded with the indelible mark of my own recent stumble. Perhaps two broken things could find some solace in shared space. Just then, Gunner's sneering voice, cold and sharp as a razor, slithered into my mind. Not actually spoken, but an echo of his words from earlier that day, twisting my gut. Look at you, Izzy. All alone, just like him. Pathetic. The imagined words were like a slap across the face, a cold dread seizing me, colder than any European winter. It was the fear of association, the fear of being seen for what I felt I truly was in that moment: weak, vulnerable, broken. My chest tightened. My resolve fractured. The connection I'd felt a moment before evaporated under the harsh glare of my own insecurities. The idea of reaching out, of sharing that space of vulnerability, suddenly felt like a terrifying plunge into deeper isolation. I couldn't do it. I couldn't risk being seen as one of them, the ones who couldn't cope. Not now, not when I was already teetering on the edge. I turned away, a coward's retreat. The creaky gate groaned again as I slipped back out, the sound amplified by my hurried steps. I didn't look back. The gravel seemed to mock my hurried pace, each crunch a reminder of my failure. I was no better than the others, just another one who turned their back. And the thought curdled in my gut, a bitter taste I knew would linger long past dusk, long into the uncertain hours of the approaching night. What kind of soldier was I, if I couldn't even face my own reflection in another's pain? The next few days crawled by like a wounded convoy, each hour heavier than the last. The image of Leo's vacant eyes, the haunted stillness that clung to him, kept replaying in my mind. I'd offered my hand, and he'd pulled away. The fear of pushing him further into himself was a heavy anchor, yet the thought of doing nothing was even worse. I found myself searching for him, not overtly, but with an unconscious radar, scanning the mess hall, the barracks, the dusty paths between buildings. I told myself it was just concern for a fellow soldier, but deep down, I knew it was more complicated, a knot of guilt and an unfamiliar, desperate hope. It was late in the afternoon, the sun casting long, sleepy shadows across the base, when I finally spotted him. He was in the base library, a quiet sanctuary rarely frequented by most, filled with the hushed rustle of turning pages and the scent of old paper. Leo sat hunched over a table, a heavy cookbook open before him. My heart hammered a rhythm against my ribs as I watched him, his finger tracing a photograph on the page, a simple Italian olive oil cake, golden and unassuming. A jolt went through me, sharp and sudden. The recipe, even from that distance, looked identical to the one my nana used to make. Overcoming the sudden tremor in my hands, I moved, a quiet determination taking over. The fear of invading his fragile peace, of seeing that same vacant stare, warred with an instinct I couldn't ignore. I didn't say a word, didn't even clear my throat. I just slid into the chair opposite him, pulling it out with barely a whisper of sound. He didn't look up immediately, still lost in the world of the cookbook. Slowly, carefully, I unlocked my phone and navigated to a picture I'd saved years ago, a photo of my nana's olive oil cake, sitting proudly on her worn kitchen counter, glistening under the afternoon sun. I held it out for him to see, silently offering a connection beyond words. His eyes, slow to detach from the book, finally lifted to my phone screen. They lingered there on the familiar golden hue, the delicate crumb, the simple perfection of it. And then, a flicker. So brief I almost missed it, but it was there, a spark of recognition in those depths that had seemed so empty. It was like watching a distant light switch on, just for a moment, in a house long abandoned. He didn't speak, didn't react beyond that subtle shift, but it was enough. It was a sign. My decision was made in that instant, clear and resolute. I was going to bake that cake for him. The next morning found me on a clandestine mission to the base commissary, scrounging for good olive oil, fresh eggs, a hint of lemon zest. The small, utilitarian kitchen in the barracks, usually only used for late-night coffee or instant ramen, became my temporary domain. Each whisk of the batter, each drop of olive oil I carefully measured, felt like a prayer, a bridge back to a world he might remember. The aroma that filled the air as it baked was pure magic, a warm, comforting hug of citrus and sweetness, so unlike the usual sterile smells of the base. I carefully cooled it, wrapped it, and set out to find him, the package heavy with hope in my hands. I found him a little past midday, sitting on a weathered bench near the edge of the parade ground, watching new recruits go through their drills with an unblinking gaze. He still seemed miles away, a ghost in his own skin. I approached slowly, not wanting to startle him, and sat down a respectful distance away. I unwrapped the cake, the scent wafting gently between us. He turned his head, drawn by the aroma, his eyes fixing on the golden confection. I offered him a slice, placing it on a paper plate, a fork beside it. He took it, his movements slow and deliberate, and lifted the fork. He took a small, hesitant bite. Time seemed to stop. His eyes, which had been so hollow for so long, softened. A subtle shift in his posture, a slight tilt of his head. He chewed slowly, savoring the taste, and then, a gasp. A sound, a raw, fragile sound. And then, in a voice barely a whisper, a single word escaped his lips for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Nonna. It was a guttural exhale thick with memory and emotion. My breath caught in my throat. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, hot and unexpected. That one word, that simple Italian endearment for grandmother, was a beacon cutting through the fog, a testament to the power of a memory, of taste, of home. But just as the warmth of that single word was settling over us, just as the relief threatened to overwhelm me, a shadow fell. A tall, imposing figure, his uniform crisp and authoritative, stood before us. Colonel Bishop, the wing commander himself, a man whose very presence could make seasoned sergeants sweat, notorious for his unyielding discipline and the sharp, piercing gaze that missed nothing. My stomach dropped. I braced myself for a lecture, for some reprimand about fraternization or inappropriate conduct with a recovering soldier. But then, the colonel spoke, and his voice, typically a low rumble of command, was now thick with an emotion I couldn't place, an unfamiliar tenderness that shattered his formidable facade. "Private," he said, his gaze fixed on Leo, a profound depth in his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. "I see you've met my grandson, Operation Nightingale. That's what I started calling it in my head. A quiet, unauthorized mission, driven by something that felt more like a primal instinct than any medical protocol I'd ever been taught. It began with the baked goods. Every second morning, just after the first faint blush of dawn touched the desert sky, long before most of the base stirred, I'd be in the small, sterile communal kitchen of the medical dorms. The smell of cinnamon and vanilla, of warm yeast and sugar, felt utterly alien in that place, a rebellious whisper against the harsh, metallic scent of disinfectant that usually hung in the air. I'd bake small, simple things: biscotti, a little lemon tart, some almond cookies. All from Nonna's faded, flour-dusted recipe cards I'd transcribed into my own worn notebook. It was a silent ritual. I'd wrap them carefully in parchment paper, then tuck them into a small, brown paper bag, securing it with a twist of twine. Then, under the guise of an early morning walk or a supply run, I'd make my way to Leo's dorm. I never saw him, never knocked, never lingered. Just a swift, practiced movement opened the door to his small, empty common room, place the bag on the small, scratched wooden table, and vanish as silently as I'd arrived. A ghost in the system, leaving behind a trace of warmth. For days, there was no change. The bags would be gone when I checked the next time, but Leo remained a closed book, his eyes still holding that distant, haunted look. Then, one late afternoon, when I was doing my rounds, I found him sitting by the window in the common room, a half-eaten biscotti in his hand. He didn't look up at first, just stared at the shifting desert sand outside. "My nonna used to bake these," he said, his voice a low rumble, almost a whisper against the constant hum of the base's generators. "Every Sunday, we'd go to her place, the whole family. The smell would hit you even before you opened the door. That was it. The dam had broken, just a tiny crack, but it was enough." Slowly, hesitantly at first, then with increasing ease, Leo began to talk. Not about the war, not about his wounds, not even about the immediate trauma. He talked about his nonna's kitchen, about the worn wooden spoon she used to stir polenta, the way the sunlight streamed through the window onto the checkered tablecloth, the heavy scent of garlic and olive oil that clung to her apron. He described the laughter, the arguments, the sheer, vibrant chaos of a large Italian family gathered around a table piled high with food. He spoke of learning to knead dough, of the careful art of rolling out pasta, of the secret ingredient in her meatballs. Each story was a precious shard of memory, piecing back together a part of him that the war had shattered. I listened, my own memories of Nonna's kitchen intertwining with his, a shared language of comfort and belonging. I knew I was bending the rules, maybe even breaking them outright. My superiors would call it fraternization, blurring professional boundaries, but I didn't care. I saw Leo slowly resurfacing, a little more human with each story. The small, almost imperceptible flickers of light returning to his eyes were worth any reprimand. I was invested now, committed, driven by a fierce, quiet certainty that this was right. Then, one chilly morning, just as the sun began to climb above the eastern horizon, I walked into the kitchen to find Gunnar standing there, arms crossed, his face a thundercloud. He held one of my small paper bags, an almond cookie exposed, the scent of betrayal. "What in the holy hell do you think you're doing, specialist?" His voice was low, dangerous, leaving baked goods for the patients. "Are you running a goddamn cookie delivery service for the government now?" I met his glare, unflinching. "I'm helping a patient, Sergeant." "Helping him? You're coddling him. You're wasting government time and resources on some damn baking project. This is a medical facility, not your nonna's kitchen. And don't think for a second I haven't noticed the change in your rounds. You're fraternizing with a patient, specialist. That's a direct violation of protocol. I could write you up for official reprimand for this." His voice was laced with a chilling threat. "This isn't a goddamn charity mission, Private. This is the military. We follow orders, not our damn feelings. I'm following my orders, Sergeant. My order is to care for the patients under my charge. And right now, this is how I'm doing it." My voice was steady, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. I knew what I was risking, but the image of Leo's vacant eyes, now slowly softening with memory, solidified my resolve. Gunnar's face tightened, his jaw working, but I ignored him. He didn't understand, couldn't understand, what was happening in Leo's world, in my world. He saw rules, I saw a soul trying to heal. I continued my ritual, a silent act of defiance. The thought of a reprimand, of facing the colonel, certainly gnawed at me, but it was overshadowed by the growing sense of purpose. I was making a difference, one cookie, one story, at a time. I was so focused on Leo, on my quiet rebellion, that I didn't notice the small, almost imperceptible figure watching me from the shadows of the adjacent building just before noon one day. A clean-cut, crisp uniform, a flash of reflective glasses. Colonel Bishop's assistant, observing from a distance as I placed a fresh batch of fig bars on Leo's table. I simply closed the door and walked away, unaware that the invisible line I had crossed was now visible to someone who mattered, someone who held more power than Gunnar, someone whose report could bring Operation Nightingale to a swift, grinding halt and me to a very uncomfortable interrogation room. The lunch break had stretched just a minute too long. Not even a full 60 seconds past the designated time, but enough. Enough for him. I had been talking to Private Miller about a stubborn hydraulics issue on a Super Hornet, distracted by the technical challenge and the easy camaraderie that sometimes blossomed even in the grime of the hangar. When I finally glanced at the massive, utilitarian clock mounted high on the wall, my gut twisted. It was a hair past 1 in the afternoon. "Rossi, get your ass over here!" The roar cut through the usual cacophony of the hangar, the distant thrum of engines, the clank of tools, the muffled shouts of the ground crew. Gunnar, his voice, a low rumble even when calm, was a thunderclap now. It carried a dangerous edge that made every head snap up. My own heart started to hammer against my ribs, a familiar drumbeat of dread. I knew what this meant. I walked towards him, every step deliberate, my combat boots crunching on the oil-stained concrete floor. He stood in the center of the main maintenance bay, a looming figure, his arms crossed over his formidable chest. Around him, the entire maintenance team was already assembled, a tight-lipped, uneasy semicircle. Their eyes, usually meeting mine with an easy nod, now darted nervously between Gunnar and me. No one dared to make eye contact. They knew this was coming. Gunnar always had a flair for public humiliation, a sadistic theatricality that chilled me to the bone. His gaze, sharp and unforgiving, pinned me. In his left hand, he held a small white bakery box. My heart sank. The box, the cannoli. I had spent a precious hour of my rare downtime the evening before, meticulously filling each crisped shell with creamy ricotta, a small gesture of comfort for Leo. He'd been struggling, the raw edges of his last combat incident still fraying his nerves, making him jumpy, distracted. I'd hoped the taste of Nana's recipe, a small piece of home, would ground him, remind him that he wasn't alone. And now, Gunnar held them, a twisted trophy. Well, if it isn't Specialist Rossi, he sneered, his voice dripping with mock politeness. Gracing us with your presence. A whole minute late. A minute, Rossi. You think rules don't apply to you? You think you're special? I stood silent, refusing to give him the satisfaction of an answer, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. My eyes fixed on the box in his hand. My stomach churned, a knot of icy dread and a burgeoning anger. He knew what those cannily meant. He knew they were for Leo. This wasn't just about my tardiness, it was about everything. It was about Leo, about me, about his relentless campaign to break us both. With a sudden, violent motion, Gunnar brought the box down. Not gently, not even a toss. He slammed it, hard, against the grimy concrete floor. The delicate pastry shells shattered with a sickening crunch. Ricotta cream splattered, mingling with the dust and oil, a grotesque mess. The sweet, comforting aroma of vanilla and sugar was instantly corrupted by the metallic tang of jet fuel and the stench of his malice. "This is what I think of your damn tea party, Rossi!" He roared, his voice echoing through the vast space, bouncing off the steel girders and the dormant aircraft. His eyes, usually just cold, now blazed with a manic intensity. "You're a disgrace to this uniform. An absolute embarrassment to this unit. And that spoiled brat you've been coddling, that soft little boy you keep making excuses for. He's dead weight we should have jettisoned months ago. He's a burden, a liability, and you, Rossi, you're enabling him." The words hung in the air, sharp as shrapnel, tearing through the last vestiges of my composure. A cold fury, stark and piercing, began to crystallize in my gut, hardening every nerve, every muscle. It wasn't the kind of hot, impulsive rage that made you lash out blindly. This was different. This was glacial, a silent, internal scream that settled deep in my bones. He had gone too far. He had not just insulted me, he had defiled an act of kindness, and he had attacked Leo, who was not present to defend himself. He had attacked the very essence of camaraderie we were supposed to share. My body felt strangely light, yet rooted to the spot. I took a single, deliberate step forward, then another, until I was standing directly in front of him. Close enough to smell the stale coffee on his breath, close enough to see the tiny flecks of red in his eyes. The hangar fell into an almost unbearable silence, punctuated only by the distant hum of the ventilation system. Every single eye in that bay was on us, on me. "Sergeant Major," I said, my voice, when it came, was steady, a clear bell in the suffocating quiet. It surprised even me with its lack of tremor, its absolute conviction. "You are wrong." His eyes narrowed, but I pressed on, drawing strength from the icy clarity of my resolve. "He is not dead weight. He is not a burden. He is one of us. He is a soldier who has sacrificed, just like the rest of us." And I paused, letting the weight of my next words sink in, not just for him, but for every man and woman standing witness. "You are not a leader, Sergeant Major. You are nothing but a bully." The air crackled, thick with the scent of jet fuel and unspoken defiance. My bad knee, a constant reminder of my own brush with a roadside bomb, throbbed faintly, but I ignored it. I stood there, refusing to flinch, my gaze locked onto his, waiting for his next move, for the fallout I knew was coming, for the ground to shift beneath my feet. The hangar held its breath, and so did I. The air in the hangar had been so thick, you could have carved it with a dull knife. Every twitch, every sharp inhale from the men around Ramirez, felt like a loaded trigger. My heart was thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and the smell of jet fuel mixed with fear was acrid in my throat. I stood my ground, hands open, voice steady, even as my gut twisted with a silent prayer. Then a shadow fell across the open bay door, and a voice, deep and resonant, cut through the tension like a finely tuned engine. "All right, gentlemen, show's over. Colonel Bishop." He stood there, framed by the late afternoon light, a silhouette of authority. His uniform was crisp, his bearing unwavering. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. It was the kind of command that simply asterisk was asterisk. The men stiffened, then slowly, begrudgingly, lowered their weapons. Ramirez, his eyes still burning, finally let the rifle sag in his grip. Bishop didn't look at me, not directly, but I felt his presence, a silent acknowledgement that he had arrived just in time, or perhaps precisely when he intended to. "Ramirez," Bishop said, his voice softer now, almost weary. "Sergeant Major is waiting for you at the gate. You're going home." Ramirez's jaw clenched, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes relief. Defeat. He nodded once, a curt movement, then turned and walked away, his shoulders hunched. The other men dispersed, melting back into the hangar's cavernous shadows, leaving just me and the colonel. The sudden silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the earlier cacophony of simmering rage. Bishop finally turned to me, his gaze sharp, assessing. "Sergeant Rossi, my office, now." I saluted, my arm feeling a little stiff, and followed him. The walk across the tarmac, the sun beginning its slow descent, felt like a journey to a different world. The familiar rumble of distant jets was a dull thrum, and the usual hustle of the base seemed muted, distant. My mind raced, replaying every detail, every word, every possible outcome. Was I in trouble? Had I overstepped? My nana always said, when you mess with a man's heart, you mess with his soul. Isabella. And I had messed with Ramirez's heart, even if it was for his own good. Bishop's office was Spartan, all polished wood and stern efficiency. A map of the region covered one wall, annotated with markers and lines I didn't recognize. He sat behind his imposing desk, gesturing to the chair opposite him. I took it, sitting ramrod straight, my hands clasped in my lap. The air was thick with expectation. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. His eyes, usually so sharp and impenetrable, seemed to hold a flicker of something I hadn't seen before. Regret, maybe. "Sergeant Rossi," he began, his voice low. "I've known Ramirez's family for a long time. His father, his uncle. Good men. Patriots." He paused, his gaze drifting to a framed photograph on his desk, a young man in flight gear, smiling. "My nephew," he said, his voice heavy. He was Ramirez's cousin. The one who hadn't made it back, I realized. The connection clicked into place, the weight of his words suddenly heavier. "When I heard about what he wanted to do," Bishop continued, his voice barely above a whisper, I encouraged it. "I told him it was the right thing to do. That he would honor his family. I pushed him, Rossi. I pushed him into the uniform, into the cockpit, without truly looking at him." My own breath hitched in my throat. This was not the Colonel Bishop I knew, the stoic commander who always had a plan, always had an answer. This was a man burdened by the ghosts of his decisions. "I looked at the reports," he said, tapping a folder on his desk, "the flight hours, the training records, the commendations. I saw a promising pilot. But I didn't see the man underneath. I didn't see the kid struggling to breathe under the weight of grief and expectation. I saw what I wanted to see, what I needed to see for the squadron, for the mission." He pushed the folder away, as if its contents were suddenly meaningless. His eyes met mine, a raw honesty I found almost unnerving. "You, Sergeant Rossi, you saw him. You looked beyond the uniform, beyond the reports. You looked into his eyes and saw the pain, and you reached out." He paused, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You did it with a cake of all things. A goddamn lemon cake." My face flushed, a strange mix of pride and embarrassment. A cake. My nana would have been thrilled to hear her lemon cake had played a part in a high-stakes military standoff. "We lost a good man, Rossi," Bishop said, his voice turning somber again. "My nephew. And we almost lost another, for different reasons, but just as devastating. This can't happen again. Not on my watch." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "I'm implementing a new program, Sergeant. Starting tomorrow, at 7 o'clock in the morning, it will officially launch. I'm calling it the Troop Wellness Initiative. It's going to be a proactive approach to mental health, peer support, and ensuring our people are whole, not just operationally sound. We're going to build a system where no one falls through the cracks, where their burdens are shared and their struggles are seen." My mind word, processing his words. A new program. This was big. This was something the brass usually talked about in hushed tones, years after a tragedy, not something implemented with such urgency. "And I want you to run it, Rossi. The words hung in the air, echoing in the quiet office. Asterisk me, asterisk my first instinct was a sharp, internal recoil. Me, a mechanic. My hands, stained with oil and grease, better suited for torque wrenches than policy papers. My domain was the guts of a machine, not the fragile workings of a human mind. Bishop must have seen the doubt on my face. He smiled, a genuine, tired smile that softened the hard lines of his face. I know what you're thinking, Sergeant. You're a damn good mechanic. One of the best I've seen. Your hands can fix anything with an engine. But that's not what I need right now. He rose from his desk, walked around it, and stood by the window, looking out at the fading light. I don't need another mechanic, Rossi. I need a baker. Someone who knows how to build things back up from the inside out. Someone who understands that sometimes the most powerful tools aren't made of steel, but of empathy. Someone who can connect people, create a sense of home, a sense of belonging, even in the middle of a war zone. He turned back to me, his gaze firm, expectant. You've already proven you can do it. You've brought a man back from the brink with a simple act of human connection. Now I'm asking you to do it on a larger scale. This isn't about fixing parts, Rossi. This is about healing souls. Are you in? My heart pounded, a different kind of rhythm now, not fear, but a strange blend of trepidation and exhilaration. My entire career had been about precision, about nuts and bolts, about making engines roar. Now, I was being asked to navigate the uncharted, delicate territory of human emotion, of mental wounds that couldn't be patched with a wrench. It was a terrifying, exhilarating proposition. A new mission, unlike anything I'd ever faced. And for the first time in a long time, the path ahead wasn't just about survival, but about something profoundly more. I looked at Colonel Bishop, the weight of his trust heavy on my shoulders, and slowly, a new kind of resolve settled deep within me. I took a breath, the answer forming on my lips, ready to embrace the unknown. Being promoted to staff sergeant felt like a victory, a hard-won badge of honor after everything I'd endured. My combat injury, the long road to recovery, the silent battles against the phantom pains, and the memories that ambushed me in the dead of night, it all felt like it was finally leading somewhere. My new rank came with a new opportunity, a chance to make good on my promise to myself, to help the other warriors on this base, the ones who carried their own invisible wounds. That's why I'd pushed so hard for the Comrade Well-Being Workshop. It was my brainchild, my attempt to bridge the gap between hard-nosed military culture and the silent suffering I saw in so many eyes. I'd spent days, weeks even, planning the first session. I pictured a room full of tired, stressed-out NCOs, hesitantly, then enthusiastically, embracing the simple joy of baking. A shared experience, a common goal that wasn't about tactical maneuvers or mission objectives. It was about connection, about finding a moment of peace. I remembered Nana's kitchen, the scent of vanilla and rising dough, the quiet comfort it brought. I believed, truly believed, I could bring a piece of that here, to this sprawling, dusty base where the sounds of choppers and distant gunfire were the daily soundtrack. My office, usually a sterile space filled with reports and regulations, was transformed. The large conference table was laden with mixing bowls, flour, sugar, bright sprinkles, and the faint, sweet smell of the pre-baked cupcakes I'd whipped up as a welcome offering. The idea was simple: we'd bake together, we'd talk, we'd eat. I'd even found some old-school Motown records to set a more relaxed mood. I polished my boots that morning, donned my sharpest uniform and stood at the door, a nervous but hopeful smile plastered on my face, waiting for the first attendees to trickle in. It was a little past 9 in the morning, and the desert sun was already beginning to beat down, promising another scorching day. They arrived, a dozen or so NCOs, mostly sergeants, a few staff sergeants like myself. Their faces were a mix of polite curiosity and thinly veiled skepticism. Some I recognized, others were new faces, hardened by deployments and the relentless grind of military life. The air was thick, not with the warmth of baking, but with a palpable tension. I launched into my enthusiastic pitch, explaining the concept of baking therapy, the stress-reducing benefits of mindful activity, the power of shared experience. I tried to inject humor, to lighten the mood, but my words seemed to fall flat against a wall of stone faced disbelief. So, Staff Sergeant Rossi, Sergeant Miller, a grizzled infantryman with a perpetual sneer, drawled, his voice cutting through my hopeful monologue. "You're saying we're supposed to bake little cakes to what? Feel better about pulling guard duty in a sandstorm, or about PFC Rodriguez getting shrapnel in his leg last month?" A ripple of snickers went through the room. Another NCO, a burly mechanic I'd seen around the motor pool, chimed in, "Yeah, I thought we had MWR for morale. Or, a cold beer after a 48-hour shift. Cupcakes, though? That's a new one." My heart sank, a heavy stone dropping into my gut. The vibrant vision I'd held so dear crumbled around me. The bowls remained untouched. The flour stayed in its bag. The sweet aroma of my welcome cupcakes, meant to be an invitation, now hung in the air like an accusation. They looked at me with open amusement, some with outright disdain. Their loyalty, I realized with a sickening jolt, wasn't to me, wasn't to some progressive idea of well-being. It was to the old ways, to the tough-as-nails ethos, and, I suspected, to the man who embodied that ethos more than anyone else, Gunner. The workshop limped on for another excruciating hour, a slow-motion car crash of forced smiles and sarcastic comments. Nobody touched the ingredients. A few picked at my pre-made cupcakes, but only to illustrate a point about how soft they were, how out of place in a warrior's world. When the session finally ended, a little after 11 o'clock, they dispersed quickly, leaving me alone in the wreckage of my good intentions. My face felt hot, my eyes stung, but I refused to let the tears fall. Not here, not now. I had to clean up. I had to process this spectacular failure. I was just gathering the last of the untouched cupcake trays when the shadow fell across the doorway. My blood ran cold. It was Gunner. But not the Gunner I knew. Not the staff sergeant who had tormented me relentlessly. His uniform was different, his bearing slightly less imposing. He was in an inventory uniform, the dull green fabric marking his demotion, his new, decidedly less glorious role. He leaned against the doorframe, a smirk playing on his lips, his eyes dark and cold, sweeping over the untouched baking supplies, the half-eaten cupcakes. Well, Rossi," he drawled, pushing off the frame and stepping into the room. His voice was laced with a chilling satisfaction. "Looks like your little baking club wasn't exactly a smashing success." He picked up one of my painstakingly decorated cupcakes, squeezed it between his thumb and forefinger until the frosting oozed, then dropped it back onto the tray with a disgusted grunt. "See? I told you. They don't want your cupcakes. They don't want your soft little ideas about feelings and therapy. This is a place for warriors, Rossi. Hard, unyielding. We don't bake our way through problems, we fight them." He stepped closer, invading my space, his breath reeking faintly of stale coffee and something else, something bitter and resentful. "You're going to fail here, Rossi. You're going to crash and burn trying to be something you're not, trying to change something that doesn't need changing. And you know what? I'll be right here to watch every single pathetic moment of it." He gave me a mocking salute, turned on his heel, and walked out, leaving me alone with his words hanging in the air like a noxious gas. I sank into my chair, the plastic mixing bowls suddenly feeling like weights, the colorful sprinkles mocking me with their cheerfulness. Gunner's words, sharp and venomous, echoed in my head. "This is a place for warriors. You're going to fail the humiliation of the workshop, the NCOO's contempt." It all coalesced into a suffocating wave of doubt. Was he right? Was I deluding myself? Was this whole baking therapy idea just a foolish, naive dream in a world that only understood grit and iron? Looking at the stacks of untouched flour, the uneaten cupcakes, the silent, empty room, I started, for the first time, to truly believe him. And that belief, that insidious whisper of failure, felt heavier than any pack I'd ever carried. The phone call came just as the sun dipped below the hangar roofs, painting the desert sky in shades of bruised plum and burning orange. I was still riding the wave of that adrenaline surge, the one that always hits after you've fought tooth and nail for something you believe in, and somehow, against all odds, you've won a small skirmish. Colonel Bishop had been true to his word. He'd gone straight to my father, a man whose silence often spoke volumes louder than any shouted order. "Isabella," he began, and I could tell immediately this wasn't just a casual check-in. His voice, usually a steady anchor in my life, was thick with emotion, cracking in a way I hadn't heard since my mother passed years and years ago. My stomach tightened. Had I pushed too far? Was he disappointed? The familiar ache of trying to live up to his impossible standard, of always being the tough, unbreakable soldier, flared in my chest. "Colonel Bishop just called me," he continued, taking a shaky breath. "He told me everything. About your little baking program. About how you're reaching these guys." He paused, and for a long moment, the only sound was the distant hum of a cargo plane coming in for a landing. I braced myself. "Your no," he finally said, and the Italian term for grandfather, a word usually reserved for family dinners and faded photographs, hit me with the force of a physical blow. After Normandy, he never spoke about it. Not one word, not for years. He'd just sit there staring, lost. My grandfather, the man I knew as a gentle giant, smelling of pipe tobacco and old books, who'd teach me how to tie fishing knots with calloused fingers. I'd always known he was a war hero, but the specifics, the scars he carried, they were veiled in a respectful silence. Nonna, my grandmother, was the vibrant storyteller, the one who filled our home with laughter and the rich scent of oregano. But your Nonna, Dad went on, his voice a whisper she knew. She didn't try to make him talk. She didn't badger him. She baked. Every single day for a year, she baked him a pie. Or a cake. Something. She'd put it in front of him, say nothing, just watch. That was her way, Isabella. Her way of bringing him back. Of reminding him there was still sweetness in the world, still home. A hot, stinging sensation pricked at my eyes. The image of Nonna, her hands dusted with flour, her eyes full of silent resolve, trying to mend a broken man with sugar and flour, suddenly made perfect sense. It was such a small, quiet act, yet so profoundly powerful. I never understood it then, Dad confessed, his voice regaining a bit of its usual strength, but still imbued with a new, profound understanding. Never understood why she bothered with all that baking. Never understood the silence. Not until now. Now I get it. I understand what you're doing, Isabella. And I'm so damn proud of you. The words hit me like a revelation, shattering the armor I hadn't even realized I was wearing. Proud of you. Not for a perfect mission, not for a medal, but for something so deeply, unexpectedly human. For a passion I'd dismissed as a frivolous distraction, a civilian weakness. For the first time, I felt truly seen, not just as a soldier, but as me. The knot in my chest unraveled, leaving behind a lightness I hadn't felt in years. It was as if my entire family legacy, stretching back through generations of quiet strength and unspoken sacrifice, had suddenly converged in that one phone call. My little baking hobby wasn't just a hobby, it was a continuation, a legacy. That phone call, received just before the base buzzed to life with the usual morning exercises, was the catalyst. It snapped something into place. My initial approach, those structured, somewhat sterile baking workshops I'd been running, felt inadequate. They were good, yes, but they were missing something. Nonna hadn't just taught Grandpa how to bake. She'd shared herself, her presence, her unwavering belief in his return. She'd created a space for healing, not just a lesson. I realized I needed to tap into the very essence of military life, that these men and women understood competition, challenge, and shared purpose. Not quiet introspection, but active engagement. The next day, just after lunch, I marched into Colonel Bishop's office, a new battle plan drawn up in my head. "Sir," I began, cutting straight to the chase, "the workshops are fine, but they're not getting to the heart of it fast enough. We need to go bigger. We need to make it a wing-wide event. A squadron cook-off series." Bishop, bless him, simply raised an eyebrow, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Cook-offs, Captain. You mean like, who can bake the best blueberry crumble?" "Exactly, sir," I confirmed, a grin spreading across my face. "But it's more than that. It's about teams. Squadrons forming up, working together under pressure, just like in the field. It's about pride, about bragging rights. And it's about sharing food, together afterward. Building something, then breaking bread. It's a challenge, sir. And these guys, they thrive on challenges. He leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face, the late afternoon sun streaming through his window, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. An interesting proposition, Captain. You think you can sell this to the wing commander? I think I can, sir, I said, my voice unwavering, and I think it'll be a game changer. And it was. The first Wing Bake-Off Challenge, held in the sprawling mess hall just after sunset on a Friday, was chaos, pure and exhilarating. Engineers competed against pilots, maintenance crews against intel officers. Aprons were donned over fatigues, flour flew like combat dust, and the air buzzed with shouts, laughter, and the heavenly scent of melting chocolate and cinnamon. There were burnt crusts and collapsed soufflés, but there was also an energy, a spirit of camaraderie I hadn't seen permeate the entire wing in a long time. They weren't just baking, they were bonding. They were sharing stories over cooling racks, commiserating over botched recipes, and celebrating successes with genuine enthusiasm. The cook-offs became legendary. We moved them from the mess hall to outdoor BBQ pits on sunny days, turning them into full-blown community events with families showing up, kids running around, the smell of smoked meat mingling with sweet pastries. It wasn't about perfect pastries, it was about the shared experience. It was about creating a different kind of combat, one where the only wounds were flour smudges and the only victory was a shared smile. Within months, the program gained traction, not just at our base, but across the entire command. Colonel Bishop, always my steadfast champion, ensured the reports detailing its success landed on the right desks. My useless hobby, the one I'd once hidden like a shameful secret, was now a recognized, Air Force-wide initiative, bringing a taste of home and a sense of shared humanity to airmen and women who needed it most. It was a bizarre, beautiful twist of fate. Months later, on a breezy morning just after Reveille, I found myself in a familiar position, though the context was entirely different. I was at a judging table, a white apron tied over my service uniform, a notepad in hand, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips. Another squadron cook-off was underway, the scent of sugar and yeast filling the air, a welcome change from the usual smells of jet fuel and sweat. A line of contestants shuffled forward, presenting their culinary creations. Each one was a testament to the raw, unrefined enthusiasm that had come to define these events. Some were masterpieces of amateur baking, others were valiant, if slightly lopsided, efforts, but every single one was presented with a reverence usually reserved for mission briefings. Then, at the end of the line, stood Gunner. Private First Class Miller, our resident quiet giant, the one who'd started this journey with a furtive glance and a whispered confession about his mother's lasagna. He looked as uncomfortable as ever in the spotlight, his large hands, usually so adept with heavy machinery, now clutching a baking tray with a fragile delicacy. He wore an apron that was clearly too small, and a dusting of flour adorned his perpetually serious face. He placed his offering on the table, a batch of chocolate chip cookies. They weren't perfectly round. Some were a little burnt on the edges, others were pale and doughy in the middle. They were undeniably uneven, a mosaic of imperfections. But they looked real. They looked honest. He didn't make eye contact, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond my left shoulder, probably on the distant mountains. He cleared his throat, a deep rumble that seemed too loud for the quiet intensity of the moment. "Captain," he mumbled, his voice barely audible over the general hum of the hall. These are my mom's recipe." My smile widened. I picked up one of the cookies. It was warm, soft, and tasted exactly like home. It tasted like comfort, like acceptance, like the unspoken stories passed down through generations. "Thank you, Gunner," I said softly, meeting his gaze for a fleeting second. A faint blush crept up his neck, and a tiny, almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of his lips suggested a nascent smile. My useless hobby. The one I'd nearly abandoned, the one that had felt so out of place in my military life. It hadn't just healed a few individuals. It had, in its own quiet, unassuming way, stitched together the fabric of an entire wing, one shared meal, one awkward smile, one imperfect cookie at a time. It had brought a little bit of Nana's magic, a little bit of home, to a place that desperately needed it. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was just the beginning. The legacy of Nana's pie, baked in the quiet resolve of love, was now soaring.